Tonight, you will uncover the most powerful secret that Zen masters have used for over 1,500 years on how to transform an anxious mind, constantly living in the past and future, into a serene presence that finds deep peace only in the present moment. I will share with you the 8 most transformative stories about presence I learned during years studying the deepest Zen teachings in monasteries of Japan, temples of China, and meditation centers where accomplished masters cultivated the supreme art of living fully in the now. Each story contains a hidden key that can instantly silence obsessive mental chatter and reveal the infinite tranquility that always exists in the present moment. These are not just bedtime stories. They are ancestral antidotes against the mind that constantly escapes to future worries, past regrets, and imaginary anxieties that steal the peace of the only moment that truly exists, this present moment. Over the next 2 hours, you will discover why the wise ones said that anxiety dies when we are born into the present, and how small changes in the quality of your attention can create a complete revolution in the serenity of your mind. So adjust your pillow, breathe deeply with me now, and prepare for a journey that will teach your anxious mind to find refuge in the only place where true peace has always existed, here and now. The first story happened in 18th century Korea, where a Zen master was about to teach the most important lesson on presence through a teacup that would forever change the lives of his disciples. Story 1. Master Hakuin and the Broken Teacup in the serene mountains of the Blue Ridge, in 18th century Appalachia, where morning mists danced amongst ancient oaks like silken ghosts, stood the Zen temple of whispering pines. It was a place of sacred silence, where only the rustling of leaves whispered secrets to the wind, breaking the profound quiet that enveloped the monastery like an invisible embrace of eternity. There lived Master Hakuin, one of the most revered Zen teachers of his time, known not only for his profound enlightenment, but for his extraordinary ability to use the simplest everyday events to reveal spiritual truths that could instantly transform the consciousness of his disciples. At 72, Hakuin radiated a presence that seemed simultaneously completely relaxed and utterly alert, like a resting panther ready to spring into perfect action at any moment. Among his 23 disciples was a young monk of 25, named Caleb, who had arrived at the monastery 6 months prior, in a state of chronic anxiety that had plagued him since adolescence. Caleb came from a family of prosperous merchants, from Charleston, where he had grown up amidst the urban chaos, constant noise, and social pressures that had gradually transformed his mind into a relentless whirlwind of worries about the future and regrets about the past. Master Hakuin, Caleb had confessed during their first private meeting, "My mind never stops moving. Even when I try to meditate, thousands of thoughts arise, like sandstorms, obscuring any moment of peace. I'm constantly worried about what might go wrong tomorrow, or rehashing conversations I had weeks ago. How can I find the inner silence I see in other monks?" "Patience," young Caleb Hakuin had replied with an enigmatic smile. "Anxiety is simply the mind trying to live in every moment except the only one that truly exists. When you learn to completely die to everything except this present moment, you will discover that peace was never absent, only obscured by your absence from the now." Over the following months, despite all the meditation practices, sutra studies, and personal guidance, Caleb continued to struggle with his hyperactive mind. He could sit in the lotus position for hours, but internally, his consciousness leaped like a restless monkey among invisible branches of anxieties and mental distractions. It was a golden afternoon in autumn, when crimson and gold maple leaves fell like jeweled rain through the filtered light, that Master Hakuin announced he would conduct a special tea ceremony for the entire community. It would not be just an ordinary ceremony, he explained, but a practical demonstration on the nature of true presence. Today, Hakuin said, gathering all the monks in the main hall, where perfectly arranged floor mats created a sacred space of elegant simplicity, we will explore what it means to be truly present through the ancient art of the tea ceremony. Observe each movement with total attention, for each gesture contains a teaching on how the awakened mind inhabits the present moment. Hakuin had prepared a low table of polished dark wood, upon which he ceremonially arranged the traditional utensils, a cast-iron kettle that sang softly over glowing embers, a bamboo whisk for frothing the matcha powder, hand-carved wooden spoons, and a teacup of extraordinary beauty, a work of art created by a renowned potter, with glazes that created unique patterns of blue and white that resembled waves frozen in porcelain. This cup, Hakuin said, picking it up delicately between his wrinkled, experienced hands, was created over 100 years ago by master potter Silas Hawthorne. It's one of the most valuable and rare pieces in our collection, considered a national treasure. Observe how its beauty exists completely in this present moment. Caleb, sitting in the front row, looked at the cup with genuine admiration. It was truly an extraordinary work of art, with every curve and pattern revealing the mastery of an artist who had dedicated decades to perfecting his craft. But even as he appreciated the beauty of the piece, his anxious mind immediately began to wander. What if someone knocks this precious cup over? What if it breaks during the ceremony? It must be worth a fortune. It would be an irreparable tragedy if anything happened. As if reading Caleb's thoughts, Master Hakuin continued speaking while holding the precious cup. The anxious mind, he said, constantly lives in imaginary worlds of what-ifs and maybes. What if this breaks? What if that goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I lose? But while the mind is lost in imaginary futures, it completely misses the only reality that exists, the absolute perfection of this present moment. Hakuin began the ritual movements of the ceremony with a grace that seemed to transform each gesture into a form of moving meditation. He heated the water with total attention, measured the green tea powder with loving precision, and mixed the ingredients with movements that were simultaneously practical and profoundly spiritual. Observe, he instructed softly, how each movement can be performed with complete presence. I am not thinking about the cup I will fill, nor the one already cleaned. I am completely here, in this gesture, in this breath, in this unique moment that has never existed before and will never exist again. The community watched in reverent silence, mesmerized by the meditative quality of the master's movements. Even Caleb felt his anxious mind begin to quiet as he absorbed himself in the simple elegance of each present gesture. Hakuin finished preparing the matcha, creating a perfect jade-green froth that seemed to contain the entire essence of an Appalachian spring in liquid form. He picked up the precious cup with both hands, offering it to the heavens in a gesture of silent gratitude, then brought it close to his chest in a sign of deep appreciation. Now, he said, looking directly into the eyes of each disciple, I will demonstrate the difference between living in the present and living in anxiety about the future. And then, to the absolute shock and horror of the entire community, Master Ha deliberately opened his hands and let the precious cup fall. The sound of porcelain shattering against the wooden floor echoed through the silent hall like thunder in a clear sky. Fragments of centuries-old pottery scattered in all directions, and the green tea spilled onto the mats, like green tears from an irreplaceably destroyed work of art. For several seconds that seemed like eternities, the silence in the hall was so profound it could be cut with a knife. 23 monks stared, with expressions of shock, disbelief, and even horror, at the fragments of the cup that had been considered an invaluable treasure just moments before. Caleb felt his heart pound with anxiety on behalf of the master. How could he do this? How could he destroy something so precious and irreplaceable? What a terrible tragedy had just happened. But Master Hakuin remained completely serene, observing the scattered fragments with the same calm presence he had demonstrated while holding the intact cup. "Tell me," he finally said, his voice cutting through the tense silence like a sword of clarity. "Where is the real tragedy here?" The disciples looked at each other in confusion, unsure how to answer such a disconcerting question after witnessing the deliberate destruction of an artistic treasure. "Master," a monk whispered bravely, "you destroyed a priceless cup, a work of art that existed for over a century." "No," Hakuin replied calmly, "I released you from the illusion. That beauty depends on permanence. The cup was beautiful when it was intact, but it was beautiful only in that moment. These fragments are beautiful in this moment. The real tragedy is not the broken cup, but the mind that cannot appreciate the present beauty because it is obsessed with preserving past beauties or anxious about future losses." He bent down and carefully picked up one of the larger fragments of the porcelain, holding it up to the light filtering through the window. "See how this fragment shines uniquely now that it is broken. See the new patterns that have been revealed through the fracture. The cup was not destroyed, it was transformed, and its new form is as perfect for this moment as its previous form was perfect for that moment." Caleb felt something extraordinary happen in his consciousness as he contemplated the master's words. It was as if a mental dam had broken, releasing waters of understanding that flooded his perception with crystalline clarity. "Anxiety," Hakuin continued, "is born when the mind tries to protect past versions of reality or control future versions of experience. But reality only exists in the present, and in the present, everything is exactly as it should be, even when it seems broken, incomplete, or different from our expectations." "Caleb," the master said, looking directly at the anxious young monk, "you have spent months trying to control your mind, fight your anxiety, force yourself to be present, but true presence does not come from effort or control. It comes from total surrender to this exact moment, including any anxiety that may be present in this moment." "How so, Master?" Caleb asked, intrigued. "Stop trying not to be anxious. Instead, be completely present with your anxiety. Observe it as you would observe a cloud passing in the sky. Interesting, temporary, part of the present moment, but not something you need to fix or eliminate. When you stop fighting anxiety and simply observe it with curious and gentle presence, you discover that it is just mental energy in motion, neither good nor bad, neither permanent nor problematic. And when you are no longer spending energy trying to escape the present moment, all that energy becomes available to perceive the deep peace that has always been here." Hakuin instructed Caleb to sit in meditation right there, among the fragments of the broken cup. "Close your eyes," the master said, "and instead of trying to have a calm mind, simply observe what kind of mind you have now. If anxious thoughts arise, observe them as you would observe fish swimming in a lake, interesting, in motion, but not dangerous. If tension appears in the body, Observe it as you would observe clouds in the sky, present now, but constantly changing. Caleb followed the instructions, and for the first time in months, instead of fighting his anxiety, he simply observed it with gentle curiosity. And what he discovered surprised him completely. When he stopped resisting the anxious thoughts, they naturally lost their power and began to dissolve on their own. The broken cup, Hakuin murmured while Caleb meditated, is a symbol of the mind that stops trying to be different from what it is. When we completely accept our present experience, including anxiety, fear, confusion, or any mental state, we discover that resistance was the only real problem. There is no perfect mind. You need to achieve, there is only this mind, in this moment, and when you are completely present with it, exactly as it is, peace reveals itself as the fundamental nature of awakened consciousness. After 20 minutes of meditation, Caleb opened his eyes with an expression of genuine astonishment. For the first time since arriving at the monastery, his mind was profoundly silent, not because he had eliminated anxiety, but because he had stopped fighting it. "Master," he said, in a voice full of reverence, "I feel as if I have awakened from a long dream where I was trying to escape a prison that never really existed." "Exactly," Hakuin replied with a radiant smile. "The prison of anxiety only exists when we try to escape the present moment. When we surrender completely to what is here now, we discover that we have always been free." In the following days, Hakuin kept the fragments of the broken cup arranged on a small altar in the meditation hall as a constant reminder that beauty and perfection are always present, even when things don't appear the way we expect. Caleb developed a daily practice of broken cup meditation whenever he felt anxiety arise. Instead of trying to fix it, eliminate it, or escape it, he simply observed it with the same curious presence and complete acceptance that Hakuin had demonstrated with the fragments of porcelain. Gradually, his relationship with anxiety completely transformed. Instead of an enemy to be defeated, it became simply another passing experience to observe with awakened presence. And as he stopped fighting it, he discovered that deep peace had always been present, not absent from anxiety, but as the conscious space in which anxiety appeared and disappeared like waves in an infinite ocean. Years later, when Caleb became a respected master, he always kept a small piece of broken pottery in his quarters. When students arrived tormented by anxiety, he told the story of Hakuin's cup and taught the same fundamental lesson. True presence is not the absence of problems. It is the total death of resistance to the present moment, including any problem that may be present now. Today, when you feel anxiety arise, be it worry about the future, regret about the past, or tension about present situations, remember Master Hakuin's broken cup. Instead of trying to fix, eliminate, or escape the anxiety, try simply observing it with gentle curiosity, as you would observe an interesting fragment of pottery. When you stop fighting your present experience and simply receive it with total presence, you discover that peace was never absent, only obscured by the energy you were spending trying to be anywhere except here and now. Story 2. Jiro, the disciple who missed the moment. In 6th century Japan, during the Asuka period, when Buddhist philosophy was blossoming like a cherry blossom amidst the vibrant landscape, a secluded temple, nestled in the mountains of Nara, known as the Temple of Supreme Enlightenment, was home to the venerable master Kenzin, a renowned teacher of Zen Buddhism, whose presence radiated a timeless quality that made anyone feel they were in the presence of eternity itself. Kenzin was famed for his teachings on Mushin, the art of living in spontaneous harmony with the natural flow of life, without forcing, without resisting, simply dancing with the present moment, like a willow sways in the breeze. Disciples journeyed from distant provinces to study with him, drawn by accounts of his extraordinary ability to remain perfectly present no matter what was happening around him. Among his 15 resident disciples was a 22-year-old monk named Jiro, who had arrived at the temple 2 years prior from a family of samurai in Kyoto. Jiro possessed a sharp intellect and a sincere dedication to the spiritual path, but suffered from a persistent problem. His mind was always a few steps ahead of or behind the present moment. During meals, while chewing rice, his mind was already anticipating the next activity of the day. During morning meditation, while the temple bell still resonated, he was mentally organizing his tasks. During conversations with other monks, while they spoke, he was already formulating his responses instead of truly listening to what was being said. Master Kenzan Jiro confessed during a private meeting in the serene temple garden, where koi gracefully swam in a pond reflecting white clouds like floating mirrors. I feel I'm constantly missing something important. It's as if real life is happening on a slightly different television channel than the one I'm tuned into. I see other monks who seem completely present and absorbed in whatever they're doing, but I always feel somewhat absent, even when I try very hard to be here. Jiro, the master replied with a gentleness that held depths of understanding, you are describing the most common human condition, living near life, but not within it. Most people spend entire decades as tourists in their own existences, observing their lives through mental glass instead of living them directly. But how can I break this pattern, Master? The more I try to be present, the more I realize how absent I am. Patience, young Jiro. True presence cannot be forced or achieved through effort. It must be discovered through a deep understanding of how the mind creates absence. When you fully understand how you become absent, presence will naturally reveal itself. Over the following months, despite all the meditation techniques and mindfulness practices Jiro diligently applied, he continued to experience this frustrating feeling of being slightly disconnected from the present moment. It was like trying to catch his own shadow. The harder he tried, the more it seemed to elude him. It was a particularly clear spring morning, when the air was fragrant with the scent of plum blossoms and the sound of birds created a natural symphony of joy, that Master Kenzan announced a special activity for the entire community. Today, he said, gathering the 15 monks in the central courtyard, where a single weeping cherry tree was exploding in pink blossoms like a pink cloud touching the earth. We will practice something I call the walk of total presence. We will walk together to the valley below to gather medicinal herbs, but we will do so in a way that may reveal the secret of true presence. The rule is simple. Throughout the journey, each person must be so completely absorbed in what they are doing that it becomes impossible to be doing anything else at the same time. When you are walking, only walk. When you are observing a flower, only observe. When you are breathing, only breathe. No divided attention, no multitasking mentally, no part of the mind wandering to other places or times. Jiro felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He would finally have a structured opportunity to practice total presence under the direct guidance of the Master. Surely he would be able to demonstrate real progress in his ability to be present. The group began their walk down the winding path leading to the valley, an ancient stone road that had been worn down by hundreds of years of contemplative footsteps. The morning was absolutely perfect. Mild temperature, gentle breeze, cloudless blue sky, and the mountainous landscape stretching in all directions like a classical Japanese painting scroll coming to life. Initially, Jiro managed to keep his attention focused on the movements of his feet, on the sensation of each step touching the smooth stone of the path. But gradually, as the walk continued, his mind began to wander almost imperceptibly. While walking, he began to think, "I'm doing well in this exercise. The master must be noticing how I'm managing to maintain focus, perhaps. This is the occasion when I finally demonstrate true spiritual progress." But then he realized he was thinking about being present instead of simply being present, and tried to redirect his attention back to the direct experience of walking. However, now he was thinking about trying to be present, which also wasn't real presence. As the group continued descending, Jiro became increasingly frustrated with himself. He tried to focus on his breath, but then realized he was monitoring his breath instead of simply breathing. He tried to appreciate the beauty of the nature around him, but discovered he was judging whether he was appreciating adequately instead of simply experiencing the beauty directly. When they reached the valley, where a crystal-clear stream meandered through fields covered with fragrant herbs swaying gently in the breeze like green waves, Master Kenzan asked the group to spread out and begin collecting specific medicinal plants needed for the temple's pharmacy. Remember, he instructed, total presence means that when you are looking for a specific herb, only look. When you find the plant, only see. When you harvest it, only harvest. No parallel thoughts, no judgments about performance, no part of consciousness elsewhere. Jiro headed towards an area where wild ginseng plants grew, determined to perform this simple task with exemplary presence. He knelt near the plants, carefully observed their characteristic leaves, and began to harvest with deliberate and attentive movements. But then something wonderful happened near him that would completely transform his understanding of presence. An extraordinary butterfly, with wings that seemed like living stained glass in shades of iridescent blue, shimmering gold, and emerald green, landed delicately on a yellow fennel flower just half a meter from where Jiro was working. The butterfly was of such impressive and rare beauty that Jiro instantly stopped his harvesting and became completely absorbed in observing it. There were no thoughts about observing, no judgments about the experience, no awareness of himself as an observer. There was only the butterfly, the flower, the dancing colors, and a quality of pure presence that was so total that Jiro temporarily ceased to exist as an entity separate from the experience. For approximately 3 minutes, there was only pure beauty being perceived directly, without the filter of concepts, expectations, or self-consciousness. It was the first moment of true presence Jiro had experienced in his entire adult life. But then, gradually, his conceptual mind began to resurface. Wow, what an extraordinary butterfly! I must memorize all the details so I can describe it to the other monks later. The master will be impressed when I tell him about this experience of total presence I'm having. The exact moment these thoughts arose, the butterfly flew away, as if intuitively, knowing that pure presence had been replaced by conceptual mental activity. Jiro felt a deep and immediate sadness, not only for the departure of the butterfly, but because he perceived viscerally that he had lost something far more precious than a beautiful sight. He had lost the state of total presence in which the separation between observer and observed had temporarily dissolved. I was truly present, he thought, with a mixture of joy at having experienced something authentic and frustration at having lost it. For a few minutes, I really managed to be completely here. But then my mind ruined everything. At that moment, Master Kenzan appeared silently behind him, as if having perceptibly sensed the quality of the experience Jiro had just had. "Master," Jiro said immediately, turning with enthusiasm, "something extraordinary just happened. There was a magnificent butterfly, and for a few minutes I was completely present with it, without thoughts, without judgments, just pure, direct experience. But then my mind returned, and it flew away. I feel I finally touched real presence, but I couldn't maintain it." The master sat gracefully on the soft grass beside Jiro, observing the spot where the butterfly had been with the same serene presence that characterized all his movements. "Jiro," he said, in a voice that carried generations of distilled wisdom, "your experience with the butterfly contains all the understanding you need about the nature of true presence. But you are interpreting the lesson in exactly the opposite way of what it actually teaches." "How so, Master?" "You said you lost presence when your mind returned. But that interpretation creates a false duality between presence and mental activity, as if presence were a special state you need to achieve and maintain, separate from the normal moments of thought. But isn't it so? When I was absorbed in the butterfly, without thoughts, I was present. When I started thinking about the experience, I lost presence." "No, my young friend, you were present with the butterfly. And you were also present with the thoughts about the butterfly. And you were also present with the sadness of losing presence. And you are present now with the confusion about presence. Presence never comes and goes, it only changes flavor." Jiro frowned, genuinely confused by this perspective that contradicted everything he had understood about spiritual practice. "But surely there is a difference between being absorbed without thoughts in the beauty of the butterfly and being lost in mental elaborations about the experience. There is a difference in the quality of the experience." "Yes," Kenzan agreed, "but both experiences are happening in the same space of present consciousness. The fundamental error is believing that presence is a particular state of mind instead of recognizing that presence is the conscious space in which all mental states appear and disappear." "Let me ask a simple question. When you were thinking about the butterfly, where were those thoughts? In the past, in the future, or here, in this present moment?" "Well, they were happening now, exactly. So you were present with thoughts about the butterfly." The question is not to eliminate thoughts or achieve special states of consciousness. The question is to recognize that you can never be anywhere except in the present moment. The only variation is the degree of conscious recognition of this presence that is already, always, complete. When you were absorbed in the butterfly, there was spontaneous recognition of presence. When you started thinking about the experience, presence continued, but now included thoughts. When you felt sadness at losing presence, presence was still there, now including sadness. Presence is like the sky, always present, whether there are clouds or sun, storm or calm. So how can I develop this ability to recognize constant presence?" asked Jiro, beginning to glimpse a completely new understanding. "Stop trying to capture or maintain special moments of presence. Instead, practice recognizing that you are already, always present. When you notice you are thinking, recognize, presence, including thoughts. When you realize you are distracted, recognize, presence, including distraction. When you feel anxiety, recognize, presence, including anxiety. True presence does not exclude anything. It is the spacious and welcoming conscious space in which all experience appears. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, everything arising and dissolving like waves in the infinite ocean of awakened consciousness. Kenzan picked up a small stone from the ground and held it in the palm of his hand. This stone is present. The grass is present. Your thoughts about the butterfly are present. Your confusion about presence is present. Your breath is present. The sound of the stream is present. The feeling of the breeze on your skin is present. Everything is happening here and now, in the only moment that exists. What you call missing the moment is simply not recognizing that you can never be outside the moment. It's like a fish looking for water while swimming in the ocean. The water, the present moment, is the element in which you always exist, whether you recognize it or not. Jiro felt a deep release as this understanding penetrated his consciousness like clear water being absorbed by dry earth. For 2 years, he had tried to achieve presence as if it were something distant that he needed to conquer, when in fact, he had never been absent from it for a single second. "Master," he said, with a mixture of relief and admiration, "so all these months, when I thought I was failing to be present, I was actually always present, just not recognizing it." Precisely. And even that failure to recognize was happening in presence. And your frustration with the failure was happening in presence. And your efforts to improve were happening in presence. You never truly left the present, not even for a moment. You merely created mental stories about being absent. "Now," the master continued, rising gracefully, "let's continue gathering herbs. But this time, instead of trying to be present, simply acknowledge that you already are. When thoughts arise, observe them like clouds passing across the sky of awareness. When you get lost in mental elaborations, smile gently and acknowledge, presence, experiencing thoughts. When you become fully absorbed in the task, appreciate the natural flow of attention. Remember, you cannot make presence happen because it's already always happening. You can only acknowledge or ignore what is already true." Throughout the afternoon, as Kenji continued gathering herbs with this new understanding, he experienced extraordinary freedom. Instead of struggling to maintain special states of consciousness, he simply acknowledged whatever state was present as a valid manifestation of eternal presence. When he became completely absorbed in identifying medicinal plants, he appreciated the naturalness of that absorption. When his mind wandered to conversations he'd had the previous day, he simply observed, presence, including memories. When he briefly worried about whether he was doing the exercise correctly, he acknowledged, presence, including concern about performance. For the first time in his life, Kenji experienced what it meant to live without resistance to his own moment-to-moment experience. It was like ceasing to swim against a current and simply floating with the natural flow of life as it unfolded. On the walk back to the monastery, late in the afternoon, as the sun began to paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose, Kenji walked with a lightness he'd never felt before. Not because he had attained some special state, but because he had stopped fighting against ordinary states. "Master," he said as they walked along the mountain trail, "I feel as if I've spent my whole life trying to arrive at a place where I've always been." "Yes," replied Sensei Ito, with a smile that seemed to contain all the compassion of the universe. "That is the deepest discovery of the spiritual path. There is no place to arrive, no state to attain, no presence to conquer. There is only a growing recognition of the perfection that is always already true. The butterfly you saw today didn't teach you to be present. It revealed the presence you had never lost, and when it flew away, the presence didn't go with it. It merely shifted form, now including nostalgia and understanding instead of colors and movement." In the following months, Kenji developed a practice he secretly called constant acknowledgement. Instead of trying to create special moments of presence, he simply practiced recognizing the presence that was always already there, no matter what was happening. During formal meditation, instead of trying to achieve states of stillness, he acknowledged, presence, experiencing attempts to meditate. During conversations, instead of judging himself for mentally formulating responses, he acknowledged, presence, including organizing mental activity. During mundane tasks, like sweeping leaves, he acknowledged, presence manifesting as repetitive movement and simple attention. Gradually, the artificial division between present and absent moments completely dissolved. Kenji understood viscerally that presence is not a state of mind, but the fundamental nature of consciousness, the aware space in which all mental states appear and disappear like waves on an infinite ocean. Years later, when he became a respected teacher, Kenji always took his own disciples on similar walks in nature, and when they invariably asked about developing constant presence, he told the story of the butterfly that had flown away, and taught the same revolutionary lesson. You don't need to find the present moment. You need to recognize that you've never been outside of it. Today, when you find yourself thinking, you are lost in thought or absent from the present moment. Remember Kenji's butterfly and the wisdom of Sensei Ito. Instead of struggling to return to the present, simply acknowledge that even the feeling of being lost is happening in the present. True presence is not a special state to attain. It is the simple recognition that you can never be anywhere except here and now. The only variation is how consciously you acknowledge this ever-changing truth. Story 3. The flower that bloomed for a day in the heart of medieval Korea. During the Goryeo dynasty, as the teachings of Seon Buddhism were taking root, like blossoming dogwood in springtime, nestled in the Jerisan Mountains lay a small nunnery known as the Byamyosa, the temple of the precious Dharma. It was a sacred haven where women dedicated their lives to a deep understanding of the transient nature of existence and the cultivation of mindful presence that transcended birth and death. Among the 15 nuns inhabiting this sanctuary of quietude was a young woman of 28 years named Soojin, who had arrived at the convent 3 years prior after losing her husband and only child to a devastating influenza that swept through her native village. Soojin had chosen monastic life not as an escape from suffering, but as a path to profoundly understand the nature of impermanence that had been so brutally revealed in her personal experience. Soojin possessed a sharp intellect and a sincere dedication to spiritual practice, but she wrestled with a fundamental question that tormented her day and night: how to find peace in a world where everything we love inevitably unravels. How to live fully when we know that all beauty is temporary, all love impermanent, and all life ends in separation. Mistress Sunhwa Soojin had confessed during one of her private meetings with the abbess of the convent, a wise woman of 60 whose eyes radiated a serenity that seemed to have made peace with all the possible sufferings of the human condition. I intellectually understand that impermanence is the nature of all things, but my heart still rebels against this truth. How can I truly love, appreciate beauty, or find joy, knowing it will all be lost? My dear Soojin, Mistress Sunhwa had replied with a compassion that seemed to embrace all the world's sorrow. Your question touches the heart of the spiritual path. Most people try to find happiness by attempting to make impermanent things permanent, or by avoiding attachment altogether to escape the pain of loss. But there is a third possibility that transcends both desperate clinging and defensive detachment. What is that possibility, mistress? to learn to love so completely that love becomes independent of duration, to learn to appreciate so deeply that appreciation becomes stronger than nostalgia, to discover a form of presence that fully celebrates each moment precisely because it is transient, not in spite of it being transient. For the following months, Soojin had attempted to apply this seemingly paradoxical teaching, but she continued to struggle to find the delicate balance between total love and acceptance of loss. How was it possible to immerse oneself completely in the beauty of the present moment, without clinging to the desire for it to last forever? It was a late spring morning, the air thick with the sweet fragrance of blooming azaleas, the hum of bees creating a hypnotic backdrop that Mistress Sunhwa announced a special ceremony for the entire community. Today, she said, gathering the 15 nuns in the convent's main garden, where stone paths snaked between meticulously cultivated beds of medicinal herbs and ornamental flowers. We will perform a ritual I call the ceremony of the one-day flower. It is a practice that may reveal the secret of how to live fully in an impermanent world. The mistress led the group to a special section of the garden where a single, extraordinary plant grew, one Soojin had never noticed before. It was a rare species of daylily, the mistress explained, cultivated for 5 whole years from precious seeds brought from a monastery in China. This plant, Myoto said reverently, gently touching one of the bright green leaves, possesses a unique and extraordinary characteristic. Once a year, it produces a single flower of indescribable beauty. But this flower lasts only a day, exactly 24 hours from the moment it fully opens until the moment its petals begin to wither and fall. For 5 years, she continued, we have tended this plant with unwavering dedication, watering it, shielding it from the elements, nourishing it with rich compost, all for this single day of blossoming. And according to my calculations, based on the plant's cycles, today is the day. Soojin gazed at the plant with a mixture of anticipation and preemptive sadness. How could something be cultivated for 5 whole years only to bloom for a single day? It seemed a cruel metaphor for life itself, years of growth and care for fleeting moments of beauty that vanish almost the instant they appear. The purpose of the ceremony, the mistress explained, is to spend this entire day in total presence with this flower, from the moment it opens until the moment it closes. We will take turns in 2-hour shifts, maintaining constant contemplative vigil, so that no moment of its brief existence passes unnoticed. But mistress, one of the younger nuns asked, won't it be too painful to watch something so beautiful die before our eyes? That is precisely the question we will explore today, Myoto replied, with an enigmatic smile. We will discover whether witnessing impermanence directly increases suffering or reveals something far deeper about the nature of true beauty. As the sun continued its ascent in the clear blue sky, tiny buds began to appear on the plant, first as minuscule green protuberances, then gradually expanding and revealing hints of color beneath. By around 10 in the morning, the first real signs of opening began, outer petals slowly parting like curtains opening to reveal a theater of natural beauty. Soojin was on duty during the 10 to 12 shift, kneeling on a small meditation mat just half a meter from the plant, watching with growing fascination as the flowers slowly unfolded like a slow-motion dance. The petals were of such pure white they seemed to radiate their own light, with delicate veins of lavender creating intricate patterns like celestial calligraphy. Initially, Soojin found herself observing with a quality of anticipatory sadness, thinking, what a tragedy that something so extraordinary will last only a few hours. Why does nature create such perfect beauty, only to destroy it almost immediately? But as the hours passed and she continued observing the gradual, majestic opening of the flower, something extraordinary began to happen in her consciousness. The sadness at future impermanence began to be replaced by a growing wonder at the absolute perfection of the present moment. Each movement of the petals revealed new layers of beauty she could never have imagined. The center of the flower opened to reveal golden stamens that shimmered like tiny suns, surrounded by a jade-green pistil that looked like liquid emerald. The fragrance emanating from the fully opened flower was of such complex and enveloping sweetness that it seemed to contain all the flowers that ever existed, distilled into a single essence. Around midday, when the flower had reached its full and glorious opening, Soojin experienced something she had never felt before, a joy so pure and intense that it depended on nothing but the beauty present in the current moment. There was no desire for the flower to last longer, no nostalgia for past moments, no anxiety about its eventual decay. There was only a total and absorbing appreciation that was so complete it seemed to stop time. This flower, she thought with crystalline clarity, is absolutely perfect, exactly as it is, exactly now. Its impermanence does not diminish its beauty. It is the very reason why its beauty is so precious and extraordinary. During the afternoon, as other nuns took turns in the contemplative vigil, Soojin continued returning to the flower between her other activities. Each time she observed it, she discovered new aspects, how the sunlight created different shadows on the petals as it shifted angle, how tiny insects visited respectfully to gather nectar, how the plant itself seemed to radiate a different energy now that its decade of growth had culminated in this moment of complete expression. Around 6 in the evening, as the first long shadows began to stretch across the garden, subtle signs of change began to appear in the flower. The edges of the outer petals began to show the slightest transparency, indicating the beginning of the natural process of closing and dissolution. Instead of sadness, Soojin felt a deep and unexpected gratitude. What an extraordinary privilege, she realized, to have been present to witness this unique manifestation of beauty. This specific flower, which never existed before and will never exist again, chose this day to reveal itself, and I had the incredible fortune to be here to receive its gift. As night approached and the flower continued its graceful closing process, Soojin understood something fundamental that would change her relationship with impermanence forever. The intensity of beauty and the depth of love do not diminish with brevity, they intensify because of brevity. A flower that lasted forever, she mused, would eventually become commonplace, invisible, taken for granted. But a flower that exists for only a day forces consciousness to open completely to receive it, to appreciate every nuance, to be totally present, because there will be no second chance. Around 9 at night, when only the golden light of lanterns illuminated the garden, the flower had closed almost completely, its petals now forming an elegant configuration that was different but no less beautiful than its morning opening. During the following hours, as the nuns continued their silent vigil, the petals began naturally to detach and fall like white snow onto the dark earth. But instead of witnessing a death, Soojin realized she was witnessing a transformation. The falling petals were not remnants of destroyed beauty, they were gifts being offered to the earth that would nourish future manifestations of life. The plant was not dying, it was completing a perfect cycle that would allow new forms of beauty to emerge. When the sun rose the following morning, the flower had completed its 24-hour journey, leaving only the healthy green plant and a circle of white petals around its base, like a natural mandala of fallen petals. Sujin, Mistress Sunhua said, approaching as she remained kneeling in silent contemplation beside the plant. "How was your experience with our one-day flower?" Mistress Sujin replied in a voice full of reverence and discovery. "I understood something I had never understood before. I always thought that impermanence was the enemy of happiness, that we needed to love less, to suffer less when we lost what we loved. But yesterday I discovered the opposite. Impermanence is what makes love possible." "How so?" "If this flower lasted forever, I would never have paid attention to it in the way I did yesterday. I would have taken it for granted, perhaps glanced at it occasionally, but I would never have completely absorbed myself in its beauty. It was precisely because it existed for only one day that each moment became too precious to waste. And when I saw the petals falling during the night, instead of sadness, I felt profound gratitude. Gratitude for having been present to receive the gift it offered. Gratitude for having had the capacity to perceive its beauty. Gratitude for being part of a universe where such miracles are possible, even if temporary." Mistress Sunhua smiled with a radiant approval that seemed to illuminate the entire morning garden. "You have discovered the secret that few human beings understand. True love does not try to make the temporary become permanent. It celebrates the temporary so completely that its beauty becomes eternal in the consciousness that witnessed it. Your husband and your child, whom you lost, are not gone forever. They have transformed from physical presences to presences in loving memory, from external relationships to inner wisdom about the precious nature of each moment we share with those we love. Yesterday's flower did not die, it completed itself, and its beauty lives on in your consciousness, where no impermanence can touch it. Every time you remember the experience of total presence you had with it, that beauty is reborn in the present moment." In the following months, Sujin developed a practice she called impermanent love. Instead of trying to protect herself from the pain of losses by avoiding deep attachments, she practiced loving each experience so completely that its beauty became independent of its duration. When she watched the sunset, she allowed herself to be completely absorbed in its colors, knowing it would last only a few minutes. When she conversed with other nuns, she paid total attention, knowing that each conversation was unique and unrepeatable. When she meditated in the garden, she fully appreciated the specific configuration of light, temperature, and sounds that would never repeat exactly the same way. Gradually, her relationship with loss transformed completely. Instead of seeing impermanence as a threat to happiness, she began to see it as the very condition that made happiness possible. There was no longer a need to protect herself from love for fear of loss, because she understood that true love transcends physical duration. Years later, when Sujin became a respected mistress, she always maintained a small garden where she cultivated flowers of particularly short lives, and whenever disciples arrived struggling with anxiety about loss or difficulty opening themselves to love for fear of impermanence, she would take them to spend an entire day observing a flower that would bloom for only a few hours. Life, she taught, should not be measured by duration, but by depth. A total experience of love that lasts a moment contains more real life than decades of superficial existence motivated by the fear of loss. When you love knowing it's temporary, you discover a quality of love stronger than time itself. Today, when you find yourself hesitant to love fully, be it a person, an experience, or even a moment of natural beauty, for fear it won't last forever. Remember Chiono's ephemeral blossom. Allow yourself to love so deeply that love becomes independent of duration. Appreciate so completely that the appreciation remains alive in your consciousness long after its object transforms. Let the memory bloom. Discover that impermanence isn't the enemy of happiness. It's the very condition that makes each moment too precious to waste on anything less than total presence. Story 4. The bell that rang in silence in the sacred mountains of Serra da Mantiqueira, in the spiritual heart of medieval Brazil, where ancient Araucaria forests created natural cathedrals of reverence and mystery. There was a Franciscan monastery known as São Bento do Sapucaí, renowned for housing the most extraordinary bell in the entire country. Forged during the colonial era by master metalworkers whose artisans' secrets had been lost to time, this bell possessed a sound quality so pure and resonant that its peal could be clearly heard more than 15 kilometers away, echoing through the mountainous valleys like the voice of the earth itself chanting sacred hymns. But what made this bell truly legendary was not only its exceptional sonic quality, but the fact that only monks who had attained a deep state of Zen presence were permitted to ring it. The sound produced by different individuals varied dramatically depending on the quality of consciousness of the one who rang it. An anxious novice produced shrill and dissonant tones, while a realized master created harmonious reverberations that seemed to open portals to dimensions of peace beyond common understanding. Among the 20 resident monks of the monastery, there was a young practitioner of 29 years old named Bento, who had arrived 2 years prior from a family of artisans in Ouro Preto. Bento possessed an exceptional dedication to spiritual practice and a sharp intelligence that allowed him to quickly grasp the most complex Franciscan teachings, but he suffered from a problem that frustrated him deeply. Despite all his disciplined efforts, he could not find the genuine inner silence that was the foundation of all authentic contemplative practice. His mind, even during the longest meditation sessions, remained populated by a constant stream of internal commentary, analyses of his own practice, comparisons with other monks, and a subtle but persistent mental chatter that never completely quieted down. It was as if there were an internal radio that remained always on at low volume, creating constant interference that prevented the profound silence in which, according to the teachings, true Franciscan wisdom would naturally flourish. Master Frei Vicente Bento had confessed during a private meeting with the monastery's abbot, a 70-year-old man whose presence radiated such deep quietude that people automatically felt calmer just by being near him. I practiced Zazen for 6 hours a day for 2 years, memorize hymns, perform all the monastery's activities with careful attention, but my mind never finds the real silence that other monks describe. There's always some level of mental activity, even during the most contemplative moments. My young Bento, Master Fray Vicente, had responded with infinite compassion. Your description reveals a still immature understanding of the nature of true silence. You are looking for a type of silence that is defined by the absence of mental sound, but genuine Franciscan silence is not the absence of activity, it is total presence that is so absorbing that it becomes more fundamental than any activity that may be occurring simultaneously. I don't fully understand, Master. The silence you seek is not an empty state of mind, but a type of presence so full that it includes all sounds, external and internal, as manifestations of a deeper quietude. It's like an ocean that remains fundamentally calm even when there are waves on the surface. During the following months, Bento had tried to apply this seemingly paradoxical understanding, but he continued to struggle to make the conceptual transition from seeking silence as the absence of mental noise to recognizing silence as presence that encompasses all noise. How is it possible to be silent and at the same time aware of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions? It was a particularly serene autumn morning, when morning mists enveloped the monastery like translucent silk veils, and the air carried the sweet fragrance of decaying jacaranda leaves, that Master Fray Vicente announced a special ceremony that took place only once a year, the ceremony of Silent Bell. Today, he explained, gathering the entire community in the main courtyard where the extraordinary bell hung from an elaborately carved wooden structure. We will perform a practice that can reveal the true nature of silence that transcends sound and the absence of sound. Each monk will have the opportunity to ring the bell, but not in the usual way. Instead of simply striking the bell with the wooden mallet to produce sound, each person will approach the bell in a state of deep meditation and try to ring it from inner silence. Some will discover that it is possible to produce true sound without physical movement. Others will discover that it is possible to produce true silence even while making physical movement. Bento felt a mixture of intense curiosity and familiar anxiety. Once again, he would be confronted with his inability to find the inner silence that seemed to come naturally to other practitioners. How could he ring the bell from silence if he couldn't even find silence during silent meditation? The first monk approached the bell, an elderly practitioner named Elias, who had lived in the monastery for 15 years. He remained motionless before the bell for several minutes, eyes closed, breathing almost imperceptible, in a state of contemplative absorption so profound that he seemed to have become a living statue of meditation. After approximately 5 minutes of absolute silence, Elias took the wooden mallet and struck the bell with a movement so smooth and natural that it seemed an organic extension of his breath. The sound that emerged was extraordinary, not just a pure and resonant tone, but complex harmonic layers that seemed to continue unfolding long after the physical reverberation had ceased. It was as if the bell had been rung not only by physical movement, but by the entire quality of presence that Elias had cultivated during years of dedicated practice. Several other monks followed, each producing unique sounds that clearly reflected their different levels of spiritual development. Some created anxious and irregular tones that revealed inner tension. Others produced mechanically correct but lifeless sounds that indicated superficial presence, and a few generated extraordinarily rich reverberations that seemed to emanate from depths of silence that Bento could only imagine. Finally, it was Bento's turn. He approached the bell with a racing heart, acutely aware that his lack of inner silence would be publicly exposed through the quality of the sound he would produce. He closed his eyes and tried to find some state of mental quietude that could serve as a basis for ringing the bell from silence. But as always, his mind continued to be full of activity. I need to calm down. I need to find silence. Everyone is watching. ... If I produce a bad sound, it will be embarrassing. ... How do other monks achieve such profound states of quietude? ... As the minutes passed, and Bento remained motionless before the bell, desperately trying to achieve a silence that continued to elude him, something unexpected began to happen. Gradually, he stopped fighting against the thoughts that arose and began simply to observe them with a different quality of attention. Ah, he noticed, there are thoughts about not being able to find silence. And there is awareness of these thoughts. And there is something that is aware of both the thoughts and the awareness of the thoughts. For the first time in 2 years of intensive practice, Bento stopped trying to create silence and began to investigate the nature of the consciousness that was always present, regardless of whether or not there was mental activity on the surface. This conscious space that is aware of everything that arises, he realized with growing clarity, is not disturbed by thoughts in the same way that the sky is not disturbed by clouds. Thoughts arise and dissolve in this space, but the space itself remains unchanged, no matter what happens in it. In that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened. Bento viscerally understood that the silence he had sought for years was not a specific mental state, but the very nature of awakened consciousness, the silent conscious space in which all mental states appear and disappear. There were still thoughts, there were still physical sensations, there were still ambient sounds, but now there was also a clear recognition that all this was arising in a field of consciousness that was fundamentally silent, not because it was empty, but because it was so spacious and inclusive that nothing could disturb it. With this understanding settling into his direct experience, Bento naturally picked up the wooden mallet and struck the bell. But this time, instead of ringing from anxiety about producing the correct sound, he rang from the recognition of the silence that had always been present as the basis of all experience. The sound that emerged surprised everyone, including Bento himself. It was a tone of crystalline purity that seemed to have been produced not by physical movement, but by silence in motion. The reverberations continued echoing through the mountains for almost 10 minutes, creating natural harmonies as they mingled with the echoes of the surrounding valleys. But the most extraordinary thing was that, as the physical sound gradually dissipated, there was a quality of vibrant silence that seemed to continue indefinitely, not the absence of sound, but the conscious presence in which the sound had appeared, and in which it now rested in perfect quietude. "Bento," said Master Fray Vicente, when the last vestige of reverberation had dissolved into the morning silence, "describe what you discovered during this experience." "Master," Bento replied in a voice that carried both humility and genuine admiration, "I discovered that I was looking for silence in the wrong place. For 2 years I tried to create silence by making my mind stop having thoughts, like trying to make the ocean stop having waves. But today I realized that true silence is not the absence of mental activity, it is the conscious space in which all mental activity appears. It's like discovering that I am not the waves on the surface of the ocean, but the ocean itself that remains fundamentally calm and unchanged regardless of how many waves are moving on the surface." When I recognized this silent space that had always been present, I no longer needed to fight against thoughts or try to create special states of quietude. Silence revealed itself as my fundamental nature, not something to achieve, but something to recognize. Master Fray Vicente smiled with an approval that seemed to illuminate the entire morning courtyard. "You have discovered what the ancient masters called the sound of silence and the silence of sound. When you ring a bell from true silence, the sound that emerges carries the quality of that silence. And when you listen with true silence, every sound reveals itself as a manifestation of fundamental quietude. But more importantly," the Master continued, "you understood that authentic presence does not require the absence of mental activity. It requires the recognition of the spacious consciousness in which all mental activity appears as temporary waves in an eternal ocean of being. In the following days, Bento practiced what he began to call meditation of conscious space. Instead of trying to create special states of empty mind, he simply practiced recognizing the conscious space that was always present during thoughts, during silence, during activities, during rest. He discovered that this spacious consciousness did not come and go like mental states, but remained constantly present as the field in which all states appeared and disappeared and disappeared. It was like discovering that he was not the temporary content of consciousness, but consciousness itself, which remained unchanged regardless of its content. Gradually, his experience of daily life was completely transformed. During conversations, instead of being lost in the content of words, he remained conscious of the silent space in which the words appeared. During physical work, instead of being absorbed only in the activity, he maintained awareness of the field of presence in which the activity arose. During rest, instead of seeking relaxation as the absence of stimuli, he found repose in the recognition of the consciousness that remained spacious and calm, regardless of the presence or absence of stimuli. Years later, when Bento became the official guardian of the sacred bell, he developed a unique practice to teach disciples about the nature of true silence. He asked them to sit near the bell throughout the morning, observing how sounds appeared and disappeared in silence. Birds singing, wind in the trees, distant footsteps, occasional conversations. Observe, he instructed, how silence is not disturbed by sounds. Sounds arise from it, dance in it, and dissolve back into it, but it remains fundamentally unchanged. This is the model for understanding the nature of awakened consciousness. It is the spacious silence in which all mental and physical phenomena appear as temporary manifestations of eternal quietude. When you recognize this silence as your true nature, he continued, you no longer need to struggle to create presence. You simply recognize the presence that has always been your most intimate essence, not as a state to achieve, but as the reality that you are and always have been. Today, when you find yourself struggling to find inner silence or authentic presence, whether during formal meditation, moments of stress, or daily activities, remember Bento's bell and the revolutionary discovery that transformed his understanding. Stop trying to create silence by making your mind stop having thoughts. Instead, recognize the silent conscious space in which all thoughts appear and disappear. Stop looking for presence as a special state to achieve. Instead, recognize the spacious consciousness that is already, always, present as the field in which all experience arises. True silence is not the absence of sound. It is the conscious presence that remains unchanged regardless of sound or silence. And when you recognize this presence as your essential nature, you discover that you are already always at the center of perfect stillness, no matter what is happening on the surface of experience. Story 5. Brother Ilias, distracted meditation in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains in 13th century. Appalachia, where perpetual mists danced amongst pine-covered peaks like ancestral spirits whispering ancient secrets, nestled the newly founded monastery of St. Jude's, established by the revolutionary Abbot Jude. This temple, destined to become a significant center of Appalachian contemplative practice, was renowned for its rigorous and innovative approach to stillness practice. A seated meditation abbot, Jude considered not merely a technique, but the very expression of awakened, inherent nature. Among the 15 pioneering disciples who had joined Abbot Jude in this new spiritual endeavor was a 24-year-old brother named Elias, who had left his classical literature studies in Charleston to fully dedicate himself to the pursuit of spiritual insight. Elias possessed a brilliant mind and a touching sincerity in his spiritual aspiration. But he faced a problem that tormented him day and night. During the long sessions of stillness practice that formed the core of monastic life, his mind stubbornly refused to settle into stable concentration. While other brothers seemed capable of sitting in tranquil absorption for hours, Elias's mind constantly flitted between memories of his former life, fantasies about his future spiritual progress, detailed analyses of physical sensations during meditation, and a never-ending stream of random thoughts that popped up like popcorn in a hot pan. Venerable Abbot Jude, Elias confessed during one of the individual spiritual council sessions the abbot conducted weekly with each disciple, "I feel like a complete failure in the practice of stillness. While other brothers meditate with a stable and clear mind, I spend each session battling an incessant torrent of mental distractions. How can I attain enlightenment if I can't even keep my mind quiet during an hour of meditation?" Abbot Jude, known for his compassionate yet rigorously precise approach to Appalachian spiritual teachings, observed Elias with eyes that seemed to penetrate the essence of his spiritual confusion. "Elias," the abbot replied with a gentleness that carried depths of understanding, "your question reveals a fundamental misconception about the nature of authentic stillness practice. You are trying to use stillness practice as a technique to achieve a particular mental state, but true stillness is not about creating or maintaining specific states of consciousness. Then what is the real purpose of stillness practice, Abbot? Stillness practice is simply being, simply sitting. It's the direct expression of the inherent nature you already are, not a method to become something different from what you are. When you sit in stillness, you are not practicing to become enlightened. You are allowing the inherent nature that is already your true identity to express itself naturally. But Abbot, how is that possible when my mind is constantly agitated and distracted? That is precisely the illusion you must abandon, Abbot Jude replied with gentle firmness. You believe that inherent nature is a calm and concentrated mental state. But inherent nature is the very capacity to be aware, whether of quietude or agitation, concentration or distraction. The awareness that is aware of distracting thoughts is the same awareness that would be aware of profound stillness. Over the following months, Elias attempted to apply this seemingly paradoxical understanding, but he continued to struggle to make the conceptual transition from stillness practice as a concentration technique to stillness practice as a natural expression of awakened presence. How was it possible to simply sit when so many thoughts and sensations constantly arose? It was a frigid winter morning when snow blanketed the monastery like a shroud of silent purity, and the air was so crystalline that each breath seemed to purify not only the lungs but the entire experience. That something extraordinary happened during the morning stillness practice session that would forever change Elias's understanding of the true nature of meditative practice. The session had begun at 4 in the morning, as always, in the main hall where 15 meditation cushions were arranged in perfect rows before a simple yet elegant altar. Elias took his usual position, adjusted his posture in the traditional cross-legged position, and began what he anticipated would be another frustrating session of battling mental distractions. Initially, everything proceeded as expected. His mind immediately began its familiar dance of random thoughts. It's awfully cold today. I hope the snow doesn't make the walk to fetch water difficult. Yesterday, Abbot Jude spoke of inherent nature, but I still don't fully understand. My left leg is already starting to fall asleep. How much time is left until the end of the session? For the first half hour, Elias followed his usual pattern of gently redirecting his attention back to his breath whenever he noticed he was lost in thought. But as time passed and the distractions continued to arise with undiminished intensity, he gradually stopped fighting them and began simply observing them with a different quality of attention. Since I can't avoid these thoughts, he decided pragmatically, I'll at least observe them clearly instead of being unconsciously swept away by them. But as he began to observe the flow of thoughts with genuine curiosity instead of frustrated resistance, something completely unexpected began to unfold. Elias realized that there were two distinct qualities of experience happening simultaneously: the ever-changing content of thoughts that constantly appeared and disappeared, and something that remained stable and unchanging, the very capacity to be aware of that changing content. There are thoughts about the cold, he observed internally, and there is awareness of those thoughts. There are sensations of discomfort in my leg, and there is awareness of those sensations. There are judgments about my poor performance in meditation, and there is awareness of those judgments. As he continued this inquiry, Elias made a discovery that shocked him. The awareness that was aware of all these changing phenomena remained itself completely unaltered, regardless of what was appearing in it. It was like discovering that he was not the waves on the surface of the ocean, but the ocean itself, which remained fundamentally calm regardless of how many waves were moving on the surface. This awareness that is aware, he realized with growing clarity, is not disturbed by thoughts in the same way that a mirror is not disturbed by the images it reflects. Thoughts arise and dissolve, but awareness itself does not come or go, does not improve or worsen, is not calm or agitated. It simply is, like the space in which all activities appear. In that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened. Elias understood viscerally that he had been searching for something he had never lost. The inherent nature he thought he needed to achieve through special states of concentration was precisely this spacious awareness that had always been present, no matter what was happening on the surface of experience. I am this awareness, he realized, with a clarity that cut through years of conceptual confusion. I am not the thoughts that appear in it. I am not the sensations that arise in it. I am not the emotions that move through it. I am the aware space in which all this appears and disappears. With this understanding settling into his direct experience, the quality of his meditation transformed instantly. Instead of fighting distractions or trying to maintain special states, Elias simply rested in the recognition of the awareness that was always present. Thoughts continued to arise and dissolve. Sensations continued to change. But now, there was a clear recognition that all this was appearing in a field of awareness that remained spacious and unaltered. It was like discovering that he had spent years trying to clean a mirror to see better, when in fact the problem had never been the clarity of the mirror, but the fact that he had been looking at the images in the mirror instead of recognizing the mirrored nature itself. When the bell signaled the end of the meditation session, after 2 hours, Elias opened his eyes with a sense of wonder that was unlike anything he had experienced during years of practice. Not because he had achieved some special state of consciousness, but because he had recognized the ordinary awareness that had always been present as extraordinary. During the period of silent work that followed the morning meditation, while sweeping leaves in the monastery garden, Elias discovered that the same recognition remained present. There were physical movements of sweeping, there were visual perceptions of falling leaves, there were tactile sensations of the broom handle, But there was also a constant awareness of this entire flow of experience that remained spacious and unaltered. This awareness doesn't go away when formal meditation ends, he realized with growing admiration. It's present during activities, during rest, during conversations, during all experiences. It's like discovering that I've always carried a treasure with me without knowing it. That afternoon, during the weekly spiritual council, Elias shared his discovery with Abbot Jude. Venerable Abbot, he said with a mixture of humility and genuine excitement, during meditation today, I experienced something that completely changed my understanding of stillness practice. I realized that I was looking for inherent nature in special states of concentration, but it is actually the awareness that is always present to be aware of. Concentration or distraction. Go on, encouraged Jude, with a subtle smile that indicated recognition. I understood that when I was distracted during stillness practice, I wasn't failing in the practice. I was simply identified with the content of awareness instead of recognizing awareness itself. But the awareness that was aware of distraction is the same that would be aware of profound concentration. And I discovered that true stillness practice is not about achieving particular states, but about resting in the recognition of this awareness that is already always complete and perfect, regardless of its temporary content. Abbot Jude nodded with an approval that seemed to illuminate the entire small meeting room. Elias, he said, you have discovered what I call inherent practice, the realization that practice and insight are not two separate things. When you sit in stillness from the recognition of inherent nature instead of trying to achieve it, stillness becomes the natural expression of awakening instead of a means to awakening. Your experience today perfectly illustrates why I call stillness practice simply being, simply sitting. Not sitting to achieve something, not sitting to change something, but sitting as the natural expression of the awakened awareness that you always have been. But Abbot, Elias asked, how can I maintain this recognition during daily activities when the mind becomes occupied with practical tasks? In the same way you discovered it today during meditation, Jude replied, by recognizing that the awareness that is aware of mental occupation is the same awareness that was aware of quietude. Inherent nature doesn't go away when you engage in activities. It is what is aware of all activities. Continued practice is not about maintaining special states of consciousness. It's about cultivating the familiar recognition of this awareness that never comes or goes, that never improves or worsens, that is always present as your most intimate nature. In the following months, Elias developed an increasingly stable understanding of what Jude taught as practice insight. Instead of using meditation as a technique to achieve future awakening, he began to practice from the recognition of the awakening that was already present. During stillness practice, he simply rested in spacious awareness, allowing thoughts and sensations to appear and disappear without resistance or attachment. During activities, he practiced recognizing the same awareness that remained present as the field in which all activities arose. During conversations, he maintained awareness of the attentive space in which words and understanding appeared. Gradually, the artificial division between practice time and ordinary life completely dissolved. Elias understood that every experience was an opportunity to recognize and express inherent nature, not through special states, but through the simple recognition of the awareness that was always present. Years later, when Elias became one of Abbot Jude's most respected Dharma successors, he always emphasized to his own disciples the understanding that had transformed his practice on that winter morning. Stillness practice, he taught, is not a technique to achieve enlightenment. It is the expression of the enlightenment that you already are. When you sit, you don't sit to become enlightened. You sit as enlightenment. And when you recognize this, you discover that there has never been a distance between practice and realization, between your present being and your awakened nature. The distracted mind and the concentrated mind are equally manifestations of inherent nature. The awareness that is aware of distraction and the awareness that is aware of concentration are one awareness, the awareness that is your true identity beyond all temporary states. Today, when you sit to meditate and find yourself struggling with distractions, or when you become frustrated at not being able to maintain states of deep concentration, remember Ilias's revolutionary discovery. Stop trying to use meditation as a technique to achieve special states. Instead, recognize the awareness that is already present to be aware of any state that may be arising. Stop identifying with the changing content of experience. Instead, recognize yourself as the aware space in which all content appears and disappears. The presence you seek is not a future state to achieve. It is the present nature of the awareness that is reading these words now, that is aware of any thought that may be arising now, that is always present as your most essential identity, regardless of what is happening on the surface of experience. Story 6. The Butterfly and the Zen Garden. In the gentle hills of the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, in the year 1788, where the harsh winters painted landscapes of stark beauty and the springs exploded in vibrant festivals of color, stood a small hermitage known as the 5 Peaks Cabin. There lived the poet-monk, Brother Thomas, one of the most beloved spiritual guides in the region, known for his radical simplicity, his spontaneous joy, and his extraordinary ability to find spiritual depth in the most ordinary experiences of daily life. Brother Thomas had chosen to live as a wandering hermit, possessing only a begging bowl, a few simple robes, and a tiny log cabin so small one had to stoop to enter. His spiritual practice didn't follow the formal protocols of large monasteries, but consisted of a fluid integration of silent meditation, spontaneous poetry, playful interactions with the village children, and a total attention to each present moment that transformed the most mundane activities into sacred ceremonies of awakened presence. During the winter of his 42nd year, Brother Thomas decided to create a small Zen garden behind his cabin, not out of aesthetic ambition or a desire to impress visitors, but as a daily practice of mindful cultivation that would integrate physical labor, appreciation of natural beauty, and the development of contemplative patience. For months of meticulous work, he transformed a small, uneven plot of land into a space of extraordinary harmony. Carefully placed stones representing miniature mountains, a man-made stream meandering through emerald moss, 3 small trees, positioned to create perfect shade at different times of the day, and beds of wildflowers he had planted from seeds collected during his walks in the mountains. Every aspect of the garden had been planned and executed with a loving attention that reflected decades of contemplative practice. The stones were chosen not only for their beauty, but for how their shape and texture complemented the surrounding space. The plants were selected not only for their colors, but for how they would bloom in sequences that would keep the garden interesting throughout all seasons. Even the way sunlight moved through the branches during the day had been considered in the arrangement of each element. The garden represented more than an aesthetic project for Brother Thomas. It was a physical manifestation of his understanding of how total presence in each moment could transform common labor into artistic expression, and how loving attention to small details could create beauty that nourished the soul in ways that grand monuments often failed to achieve. The following spring, as the first flowers began to bloom and reveal the results of months of patient cultivation, Brother Thomas established a daily routine of sitting in silent meditation in the center of his garden at sunrise. It was a simple practice, observing how the light gradually revealed colors and forms that remained hidden in the darkness, listening to the gradual awakening of natural sounds as birds and insects began their daily activities, and allowing consciousness to rest in the spontaneous tranquility that emerged when the mind stopped trying to be anywhere except here and now. It was during one of these spring morning sessions, when the dogwood blossoms in the garden were in full bloom, creating an atmosphere of romantic delicacy that seemed to suspend time, that something happened that would become one of the most transformative moments in Brother Thomas' already profound spiritual life. He was sitting in perfect stillness in the center of the garden, absorbed in the contemplation of how dewdrops on the dogwood petals created tiny prisms that split the morning light into microscopic rainbows, when an extraordinary butterfly appeared and landed directly on the palm of his right hand, which rested open on his knee. The butterfly was of striking beauty, wings that seemed to have been painted by a celestial artist in shades of iridescent blue, shimmering gold, and velvety black that created geometric patterns of hypnotic complexity. But what most captivated Brother Thomas was not its visual beauty, but the quality of total presence it demonstrated, completely absorbed in the present moment, without anxiety about predators, without haste to get to another place, without an agenda beyond simply being a butterfly resting on a perfect spring morning. What an extraordinary spiritual teacher, Brother Thomas thought with genuine admiration, teaching presence through pure example, without words, without concepts, only through its completely present existence in this moment. For nearly an hour, Brother Thomas and the butterfly remained in mutual stillness, he absorbed in the contemplation of its meticulous beauty, it seemingly absorbed in something only butterflies understand. There was no sense of boredom or impatience from either party, only a timeless quality of shared presence that seemed to suspend the ordinary laws of cause and effect, time and space. As the sun continued its ascent and the light became more intense, creating new angles of illumination that revealed different aspects of the butterfly's wings, Brother Thomas began to experience something he had never felt before in decades of spiritual practice, a gradual dissolution of the boundary between observer and observed. It wasn't that he had lost individual consciousness or entered some mystical trance. It was more subtle and more natural. The consciousness that was observing the butterfly and the consciousness that was being the butterfly seemed to reveal themselves as one consciousness experiencing itself from two different perspectives simultaneously. There are not really two beings here, he realized with a clarity that was both shocking and completely obvious. There is a single consciousness appearing as man observing butterfly and butterfly being observed. The separation between us is only a mental concept that obscures our fundamental unity. At that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened that would remain in Brother Thomas' memory for the rest of his life. The butterfly slowly opened and closed its wings several times, as if signaling something important, then flew in a slow circular pattern around his head before landing again, this time directly on top of his shaved head. It was as if it were offering a silent transmission of wisdom that transcended any verbal teaching. True presence is not something you do or achieve, it is something you are. And when you rest completely in what you are, without trying to become something different, without resisting what is present now, you discover that there has never been a separation between you and all the life that surrounds you. For another 15 minutes, Brother Thomas remained motionless with the butterfly perched on his head, experiencing a quality of union that was more intimate than any human relationship he had ever known. There were no thoughts about the experience, no judgments about its spiritual significance, no desire for it to last longer, or fear that it would end. There was only pure presence experiencing itself through temporary forms of man and butterfly. Finally, as the sun approached midday and the heat began to intensify, the butterfly gently flew away, disappearing among the dogwood blossoms as if it had never existed except in the consciousness that had witnessed its mysterious visit. But something fundamental had changed in Brother Thomas during that hour and a half of silent communion. He understood viscerally something he had read in scriptures for years without truly understanding: the realization that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are not two different things, but a single consciousness experiencing itself through seemingly multiple perspectives. In the following days, as Brother Thomas continued his daily routine of morning meditation in the garden, he discovered that his experience with the butterfly had permanently transformed his relationship with all forms of life. When he observed flowers, there was no longer a sense of looking at something external. There was a recognition of consciousness appreciating its own expression through form and color. When he listened to birds singing, it wasn't Brother Thomas listening to separate sounds. It was consciousness delighting in its own music created through tiny feathered throats. The entire garden, he realized during a morning session a week later, is not something I cultivate and observe from the outside. It is an extension of my own consciousness experiencing beauty through mineral, vegetable, and animal forms. And I am not someone separate appreciating the garden. I am one of the forms through which the garden appreciates itself. This understanding gradually expanded to include his entire life experience. During his daily walks in the mountains, instead of Brother Thomas walking through nature, there was consciousness moving through itself, using human legs to explore its own landscapes. During his interactions with village children, instead of an adult playing with children, there was joy expressing itself through multiple forms to celebrate its own playful nature. The poetry Brother Thomas wrote during this period clearly reflected this transformation of perspective. Instead of poems about experiences he had had, he began to write poems that were experiences expressing themselves through him. The butterfly lands on my hand. There is no butterfly, no hand, only beauty, recognizing beauty in the frameless mirror of spring. Dogwood petals fall on consciousness that has no center, each petal a word in the poem that writes itself. Months later, when a young monk visited Brother Thomas seeking guidance on how to develop stable presence during meditation, he told the story of the butterfly and explained the understanding that had emerged from that transformative encounter. True presence, Brother Thomas taught, is not about keeping your attention focused on specific objects. It's about recognizing that you are the very consciousness in which all objects appear and disappear. When you understand this, there is no longer an effort to be present, because you recognize that you can never be absent from yourself. The butterfly taught me that consciousness is not located inside my head, looking at an external world. Consciousness is the space in which butterflies, gardens, bodies, thoughts, and all experience arise as temporary waves in an ocean that has no shores. When you meditate, he continued, don't try to focus on your breath, as if it were an object separate from you. Recognize yourself as the spacious consciousness in which the breath is appearing. Don't try to become present. Recognize the presence that you already are as the field in which all practice happens. The young monk, initially confused by this radical non-dual approach, gradually began to understand through his own direct experience. In the following days, practicing in Brother Thomas' garden under his gentle guidance, he discovered that when he stopped trying to become present and simply recognized the presence that already was, meditation became as natural as breathing. It's like discovering that I've always been home, he said to Brother Thomas after a particularly profound session. But I was looking for home everywhere, except where I already was. Yes, replied Brother Thomas, with a radiant smile, that's exactly the discovery the butterfly offered to me. The presence you seek is not a future destination, it is your present nature, that was never lost and can never be found because it was never absent. Years later, Brother Thomas' small Zen garden became a pilgrimage site for practitioners from all over the country who came not only to see the space where the famous butterfly transmission had occurred, but to sit in meditation and discover for themselves the truth that Brother Thomas had realized, that authentic presence is not a state to achieve, but the fundamental nature of consciousness that is always available for recognition. Brother Thomas continued to live in his simple cabin until his death at 72, always maintaining the garden as a living temple of silent teaching. And whenever visitors asked about the secret of his constant serenity and spontaneous joy, he pointed to the spot where the butterfly had landed on his hand and said simply, I learned that there is no practitioner and practice, there is no meditator and meditation, there is only life experiencing itself through temporary forms that arise and dissolve into the infinite space of present consciousness. When you recognize this, every moment becomes a Zen garden, and every encounter becomes a transmission of awakening. Today, when you sit in meditation or simply pause to be present in any moment of your life, remember Brother Thomas, butterfly, and the wisdom it transmitted through its silent presence. Stop trying to become present as if presence were something you don't have. Instead, recognize the consciousness that is already present as the space in which all experience arises. Stop seeking union with life as if you were separate from it. Instead, recognize yourself as one of the countless forms through which life experiences and appreciates itself. The presence that you are does not need to be developed or maintained. It simply needs to be recognized as that which you have never ceased to be, even during those moments when it seemed most absent from yourself. There was no sense of boredom or impatience from either party, only a timeless quality of shared presence that seemed to suspend the ordinary laws of cause and effect, time and space. As the sun continued its ascent and the light grew more intense, creating new angles of illumination that revealed different aspects of the butterfly's wings, Kenji began to experience something he had never felt before in decades of spiritual practice, a gradual dissolution of the boundary between observer and observed. It wasn't that he had lost individual consciousness or entered some mystical trance. It was subtler and more natural. The consciousness that was observing the butterfly and the consciousness that was being the butterfly seemed to reveal themselves as a single consciousness, experiencing itself from two different perspectives simultaneously. There aren't really two beings here, he realized with a clarity that was both shocking and completely obvious. There's a single consciousness appearing as man observing butterfly and butterfly being observed. The separation between us is merely a mental concept that obscures our fundamental unity. At that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened that would remain in Kenji's memory for the rest of his life. The butterfly slowly opened and closed its wings several times, as if signaling something important, then flew in a slow, circular pattern around his head before landing again, this time directly atop his shaved cranium. It was as if it were offering a silent transmission of wisdom that transcended any verbal teaching. True presence isn't something you do or achieve. It's something you are, and when you rest completely in what you are, without trying to become something different, without resisting what is present now, you discover there was never any separation between you and all the life surrounding you. For another 15 minutes, Kenji remained motionless with the butterfly perched on his head, experiencing a quality of union that was more intimate than any human relationship he had ever known. There were no thoughts about the experience, no judgments about its spiritual significance, no desire for it to last longer or fear that it would end. There was only pure presence experiencing itself through the temporary forms of man and butterfly. Finally, as the sun approached midday and the heat began to intensify, the butterfly gently flew away, disappearing among the plum blossoms as if it had never existed except in the consciousness that had witnessed its mysterious visit. But something fundamental had changed in Kenji during that hour and a half of silent communion. He understood viscerally something he had read in sutras for years without truly understanding. The realization that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are not two different things, but a single consciousness experiencing itself through seemingly multiple perspectives. In the following days, as Kenji continued his daily routine of morning meditation in the garden, he discovered that his experience with the butterfly had permanently transformed his relationship with all forms of life. When he observed flowers, there was no longer a sense of looking at something external. There was a recognition of consciousness, appreciating its own expression through form and color. When he listened to birds singing, it wasn't Kenji listening to separate sounds. It was consciousness delighting in its own music created through tiny feathered throats. The entire garden, he realized, during a morning session a week later, isn't something I cultivate and observe from the outside. It's an extension of my own consciousness, experiencing beauty through mineral, vegetal, and animal forms. And I'm not someone separate appreciating the garden. I am one of the forms through which the garden appreciates itself. This understanding gradually expanded to include his entire life experience. During his daily walks in the mountains, instead of Kenji walking through nature, there was consciousness moving through itself, using human legs to explore its own landscapes. During his interactions with village children, instead of an adult playing with children, there was joy expressing itself through multiple forms to celebrate its own playful nature. The poetry Kenji wrote during this period clearly reflected this transformation of perspective. Instead of poems about experiences he had had, he began to write poems that were experiences expressing themselves. Through him, the butterfly lands on my hand. There is no butterfly, no hand, only beauty, recognizing beauty in the frameless mirror of spring. Plum blossoms fall into consciousness that has no center, each petal a word in the poem that writes itself. Months later, when a young monk visited Kenji, seeking guidance on how to develop stable presence during meditation, he told the story of the butterfly and explained the understanding that had emerged from that transformative encounter. True presence, Kenji taught, isn't about keeping your attention focused on specific objects. It's about recognizing that you are the very consciousness in which all objects appear and disappear. When you understand this, there's no more effort to be present because you recognize that you can never be absent from yourself. The butterfly taught me that consciousness isn't located inside my head looking at an external world. Consciousness is the space in which butterflies, gardens, bodies, thoughts, and all experience arise as temporary waves in an ocean that has no shores. When you meditate, he continued, don't try to focus on your breath as if it were an object separate from you. Recognize yourself as the spacious consciousness in which the breath is appearing. Don't try to become present. Recognize the presence you already are as the field in which all practice happens. The young monk, initially confused by this radical non-dual approach, gradually began to understand through his own direct experience. Over the next few days, practicing in Kenji's garden, under his gentle guidance, he discovered that when he stopped trying to become present and simply recognized the presence he already was, meditation became as natural as breathing. It's like discovering I've always been home, he said to Kenji after a particularly profound session. But I was looking for home everywhere, except where I already was. Yes, Kenji replied, with a radiant smile, that's exactly the discovery the butterfly offered to me. The presence you seek isn't a future destination, it's your present nature that was never lost and can never be found because it was never absent. Years later, Kenji's small Zen garden became a pilgrimage site for practitioners from all over Japan, who came not only to see the space where the famous butterfly transmission had occurred, but to sit in meditation and discover for themselves the truth that Kenji had realized, that authentic presence isn't a state to attain, but the fundamental nature of consciousness that is always available for recognition. Kenji continued living in his simple hut until his death at 72, always maintaining the garden as a living temple of silent teaching. And whenever visitors asked about the secret of his constant serenity and spontaneous joy, he pointed to the spot where the butterfly had landed on his hand and said simply, I learned that there is no practitioner and practice, no meditator and meditation. There is only life experiencing itself through temporary forms that arise and dissolve into the infinite space of present consciousness. When you recognize this, every moment becomes a Zen garden, and every encounter becomes a transmission of awakening. Today, when you sit in meditation or simply pause to be present in any moment of your life, remember Kenji's butterfly and the wisdom it transmitted through its silent presence. Stop trying to become present as if presence were something you lack. Instead, recognize the consciousness that is already present as the space in which all experience arises. Stop seeking union with life as if you were separate from it. Instead, recognize yourself as one of the countless forms through which life experiences and appreciates itself. The presence you are doesn't need to be developed or maintained. It simply needs to be recognized as that which you never ceased to be, even during the moments when you seemed most absent from yourself. Story 7. Tetsu the Walker and the Stone on the Path in the rural mountains of 17th century Korea, where ancient trails snaked through forests of pine and oak that had witnessed centuries of spiritual seekers on pilgrimage, lived a 45-year-old merchant named Tetsu. He had built a prosperous life, selling fine silks and linens between mountain villages, constantly traveling the rocky roads, connecting isolated communities, always carrying a heavy pack filled with vibrant fabrics that brought joy and beauty to people living simple lives in remote places. Tetsu had developed a complex relationship with his constant travels. On the one hand, he loved the freedom of movement, the opportunity to meet diverse people, and the satisfaction of providing goods that improved the quality of life for his clientele. On the other hand, after 20 years of a nomadic life, he was beginning to feel a growing unease, a sense that he was always moving, but never truly arriving anywhere, always busy, but never deeply satisfied. I spend my life going from one place to another, he often reflected during his solitary walks, ... but I feel as if I'm running away from something I can't identify. It's as if I'm searching for something important, but I don't know what I'm looking for, or where to find it. During his travels, Tetsu occasionally stopped at temples and monasteries to rest and seek spiritual guidance. He had heard teachings on meditation, presence, and the importance of cultivating inner stillness, but he always felt that these concepts were relevant to monks living contemplative lives, not to busy merchants who constantly needed to move and deal with the practical concerns of the secular world. It was during one of these trading journeys, on a warm summer afternoon, when the sun filtered through the treetops, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor, that Tetsu encountered the venerable master Xiangxiol resting near a crystalline natural spring that gurgled from the mountain rocks. Xiangxiol was known throughout the region as one of the most accessible and practical Zen masters of his time, famous for teaching what he called natural Zen, an approach to spiritual realization that didn't depend on complicated formal techniques or years of rigorous training in monasteries, but on the simple discovery of the awakened presence that was already naturally available to anyone willing to recognize it. Master Xiangqiul, said Tetsu, approaching respectfully, I am just an ordinary merchant without formal spiritual education, but for years I have felt an unease that I cannot resolve. I hear about enlightenment and presence, but this seems relevant only to monks who have time to meditate. Is it possible for someone like me, always traveling and busy with business, to find the inner peace you teach? Xiangqiul looked at Tetsu with eyes radiating a penetrating kindness, studying not only his words, but the quality of sincere unease emanating from his entire being. Tetsu, the master replied, your question reveals a common misconception that keeps many people trapped in unnecessary suffering. You believe that presence and enlightenment are special states that need to be cultivated through specific practices in specific environments. But true presence is not something you do, it's something you are. I don't understand, Master. Let me ask you some simple questions, said Xiangqiul with an enigmatic smile. During your constant travels, are you aware that you are walking? Yes, certainly. Are you aware of the landscapes you pass, the sounds of nature around you, the sensations of movement in your body? Yes, that's obvious. Are you aware of your thoughts about business, your memories of clients, your plans for the next stops? Yes, my mind is often occupied with these things. Then tell me, continued Xiangqiul, ... this awareness that is aware of walking, landscapes, sensations, and thoughts, does it come and go, or does it remain constantly present throughout all these different experiences? Tetsu considered carefully before answering. Well, ... the awareness seems to always be there. It's the content that changes. Sometimes I'm aware of one thing, sometimes of another, but the capacity to be aware remains constant. Exactly, exclaimed Xiangqiul with genuine enthusiasm. You have just described your Buddha nature. This awareness that is always present, that is aware of activity and rest, movement and stillness, busyness and calm. This is exactly what the sutras call original mind or awakened nature. But Master, that seems too simple. Surely enlightenment requires years of disciplined practice. That is the illusion that keeps people searching outside themselves for what they never lost, replied Xianxiu gently. You don't need to acquire awareness. You are awareness. You don't need to achieve presence. You are always present. The only thing needed is to clearly recognize what is already true. To demonstrate his point, Xiangxiu suggested a practical experiment. Let's walk together for an hour along the trail ahead, he said, ... But let's do it in a way that can reveal something extraordinary about the nature of true presence. They began walking along the narrow trail, winding through the dense forest, but Xiangqiu instructed Tetsu to pay attention not only to the destination or the thoughts about business that usually dominated his mind during travels, but to the very experience of walking, moment by moment. I'm not asking you to do anything different from what you already do naturally, explained Xianqiu as they walked. I'm just asking you to clearly notice what is already happening. Notice how your feet touch the ground, how air enters and leaves your lungs, how the sounds of the forest arise and dissolve, how thoughts appear and disappear. But most importantly, he continued, ... Notice the awareness that is aware of all these experiences. Does this awareness change when the content changes? Does it get tired when the body gets tired? Does it get worried when worrying thoughts arise? As Tetsu followed these simple instructions, something extraordinary began to unfold. He realized that there were two distinct qualities in his experience: the constant flow of changeable content, physical sensations, visual and auditory perceptions, thoughts about business, memories, plans, and something that remained stable and unchanged through all these changes. This awareness that is aware, he observed with growing fascination, ... really doesn't seem to be affected by anything that arises in it. It's like the sky that remains clear, regardless of what kind of clouds are passing by. Precisely, confirmed Xiangxiu. And now tell me, is this clear and unchanging awareness different during busy walking and during silent rest? Is it different when you are negotiating with clients and when you are alone in the forest? Tetsu considered carefully, examining his direct experience. No. The awareness seems to be the same. The content is different, but the awareness itself doesn't change in quality. It's always spacious, always present, always clear. At that moment, something seemingly insignificant happened that would become one of the most transformative events in Tetsu's life. As they walked and talked, he inadvertently kicked a small but sharp stone that was in the middle of the trail. The stone flew a few feet ahead and made a distinct sound when it landed among the dry leaves. Normally, Tetsu would have completely ignored such a trivial event, but because he was practicing full attention under Xiangqiu's guidance, he observed the entire sequence with unusual clarity. The sensation of contact between foot and stone, the sound of the stone flying through the air, the noise of its landing, and then something extraordinary. Master, he said, stopping abruptly. ... Something just happened that I don't know how to explain. What did you observe when I kicked the stone? For a moment there was only pure action. There was no eye kicking an external stone. There was only movement happening in awareness, sound appearing in awareness without a sense of separation between who acts and what is acted upon. And how did it feel in that moment of action without separation? Tetsu was silent for a long moment, trying to find words for something that transcended conceptual language. It felt completely natural, as if that's how life always happens. But I usually don't notice because I'm busy creating mental stories about me doing things instead of simply experiencing life happening. Tetsu, said Xiangxiu, with a radiant smile. You have just discovered what I call action without an actor, the recognition that all experience arises spontaneously in awareness without a separate self that needs to control it or direct it. But does that mean I have no control over my actions? It means exactly the opposite, replied Xiangxiu. It means that you are free from the illusion of being a separate entity that constantly needs to strive to control experiences. When you recognize that you are the awareness in which all action arises naturally, you discover that life lives through you with an intelligence and efficiency that transcends any mental planning. During the rest of the walk, Tetsu experienced a freedom he had never known. Instead of feeling that he needed to consciously direct every movement, every decision, every response to circumstances, he discovered that when he simply rested in the spacious awareness he had recognized, appropriate actions arose naturally, without effort or anxiety. It's like discovering that I was always trying to steer a river that already flows perfectly to where it needs to go, he said to Xiangqiu as they approached the end of the trail. Yes, the master agreed. And now you understand why I call this natural Zen. It's not something you need to practice or develop. It's simply the recognition of how life has always worked, but which remained obscured by concepts about being a separate person who needs to make things happen. In the following months, as Tetsu continued his trading journeys, his experience of life transformed radically. Instead of feeling that he was constantly moving toward some future destination, he discovered that each step of the journey was the destination. Instead of anxiety about business and worry about results, there was a natural trust in the intelligence of life to unfold appropriately through him. During negotiations with clients, instead of trying to control outcomes, he simply allowed conversations to flow naturally, discovering that when he wasn't trying to manipulate situations, the results were often better than anything he could have planned. During solitary walks, instead of being lost in thoughts about the past and future, he found himself absorbed in the present beauty of each moment of the journey. The unease I felt for years, he realized, came from trying to always be somewhere different from where I was. But when I recognize that I am already, always at home, in the present awareness, there is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, no one to become. Years later, when Tetsu eventually retired from commerce and became a kind of lay master, he always used walks as his primary teaching method. He would take visitors on journeys along the same trails where he had discovered his own awakened nature, and invariably, at some point during the walk, someone would kick a stone and have a similar experience of action without an actor. The stone on the path, he used to say, is not an obstacle to enlightenment. It is enlightenment disguised as ordinary experience. When you recognize that there is no difference between who walks and the path walked, between who acts and the action performed, you discover that you have always been walking on the sacred ground of awakened awareness. Today, when you find yourself in motion, whether walking to work, driving to an appointment, or simply moving through the activities of your daily life, remember Tetsu's stone and the transformative discovery it catalyzed. Stop feeling that you are a separate entity moving through an external world. Instead, recognize yourself as the awareness in which all movement arises spontaneously. Stop trying to control every aspect of your experience. Instead, trust the natural intelligence of life to flow through you with a wisdom that transcends mental planning. The presence you seek is not in some future destination. It is the conscious ground upon which each step happens, the awakened essence that is always at home, regardless of where your body may be moving. Story 8. The moon reflected in the lake in the serene heart of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Renowned for their breathtaking meadows, ablaze with wildflowers during summer, sat a small convent called Santa Clara, home to one of the most revered spiritual teachers in 19th century California. Her name was Luminaria, meaning moonlight, an extraordinary woman who had lived a life of profound spiritual transformation after experiencing devastating losses that led her from the secular world to a contemplative path. Luminaria was born into an affluent family in San Francisco, married young, and successively lost her husband and 3 young children to the devastating influenza pandemic that swept the region. At 30, heartbroken but not broken, she chose monastic life as a way to transform suffering into wisdom and find meaning that transcended the temporary tragedies of human existence. For 15 years of intensive practice, Luminaria developed not only a deep understanding of Christian mysticism, but also extraordinary skills in poetry, calligraphy, and pottery, which she used as artistic expressions of spiritual insights. Her handcrafted bowls were sought after throughout the region, not only for their aesthetic beauty, but because each piece carried an energetic quality that elevated any drinking experience into a contemplative ceremony of presence. Now 45, Luminaria had established a reputation as a teacher, possessing a unique ability to use ordinary natural events as direct teachings about the nature of reality. She rarely gave formal lectures or conducted structured question and answer sessions. Instead, she lived so completely present and awake that every interaction with her naturally became a transmission of wisdom. Among the 12 young nuns living at the convent under her guidance was a 20-18-year-old practitioner named Isabella, who had arrived 2 years prior after a profound existential crisis that left her unable to find meaning in any aspect of ordinary life. Isabella was intelligent, dedicated, and sincere in her spiritual quest, but struggled with a fundamental question that tormented her: how to find inner stability in a world where everything is constantly changing. Sister Luminaria Isabella confessed during one of their weekly meetings in the convent's tranquil garden, where a small natural pond mirrored the sky like a perfect mirror, surrounded by mossy rocks and delicate aquatic plants. I intellectually understand that impermanence is the nature of all things, but my heart still rebels against this truth. How can I find lasting peace when everything I value inevitably changes or disappears? My dear Isabella, Luminaria responded with a compassion that seemed to emanate from decades of transforming her own suffering into healing wisdom. Your question touches the heart of the spiritual path. Most people seek stability by trying to make impermanent things permanent, or by trying to find something that doesn't change to cling to. But there's a third possibility that transcends both desperate attachment and defensive detachment. What is that possibility, sister? Discovering that within you which never changes, even when everything else is in constant flux. Finding the fundamental stability that is independent of the stability of any particular experience. Over the following months, Isabella tried to apply this seemingly paradoxical guidance, but continued to struggle to concretely identify what could remain stable amidst universal change. How could one find something unchanging when even her own thoughts, emotions, and perceptions were constantly transforming? It was a particularly clear autumn evening when the full moon shone with an almost supernatural intensity, transforming the entire landscape into silvery shades of ethereal beauty. That Sister Luminaria invited the entire community to a special ceremony she called Contemplation of the Moon in the Lake. Tonight, she explained, gathering the 12 nuns at the edge of the small pond in the center of the convent gardens, the moon is at its perfect fullness, and the pond is completely calm. It's a rare configuration that offers a unique opportunity to understand something profound about the nature of true stability amidst constant change. Luminaria instructed the nuns to sit in a circle around the pond, each silently contemplating the perfect reflection of the full moon on the water's mirrored surface. The reflected lunar image was of extraordinary clarity and beauty, seeming almost more real and vivid than the actual moon in the sky. "Observe carefully," the teacher said softly, "both the moon in the sky and its reflection in the water. Notice how they are simultaneously one moon and two manifestations. Notice how the moon in the sky remains stable, while the moon in the water can be disturbed by any movement on the surface." For the first hour of silent contemplation, the pond remained perfectly calm, creating a lunar reflection so clear and stable that it was impossible to visually distinguish it from the real moon. Isabella became completely absorbed in the hypnotic beauty of the scene, feeling a deep peace that came simply from being present with something so pure and harmonious. But then, as if nature were consciously collaborating with Luminaria's teaching, a gentle breeze began to gently stir the surface of the pond. The moon's reflection, which had been perfectly clear and stable for an hour, began to tremble and fragment into hundreds of small dancing moons that flickered like liquid diamonds in the moving water. Isabella felt an automatic sadness as the perfect image disintegrated into mutable fragments. It was like a cruel metaphor for life itself. Perfect moments of beauty and harmony inevitably fragmented into chaos and uncertainty. But Sister Luminaria observed the transformation with the same serenity she had demonstrated during the hour of perfect reflection. "Isabella," she said gently, noticing her disciple's melancholic expression, "where is the moon now? It's fragmented." Isabella replied hesitantly. The reflection broke into pieces when the water started to move. "Look again, more carefully," Luminaria instructed. "What happened to the real moon in the sky?" Isabella looked up and saw that the moon in the sky remained exactly as it had been all night, complete, bright, unaltered by the disturbance of its reflection in the water. "The real moon hasn't changed," she admitted. "Only its reflection in the water was disturbed." "Precisely," said Luminaria with a smile that seemed to radiate understanding from infinite depths. "And now tell me, how many moons are there?" Isabella looked carefully at both the sky and the agitated water before answering. "There single quotes as ... one moon in the sky and many fragmented images in the water, but they are all manifestations of the same single moon." "Exactly. And which of these manifestations is more real, the stable moon in the sky or the dancing fragments in the water?" "The moon in the sky is the real source. The reflections in the water are only temporary appearances." "Now," said Luminaria, her voice carrying a gentle authority that commanded full attention, "let me ask the most important question. Where is the consciousness that is observing both the moon in the sky and its reflections in the water?" Isabella was silent for several minutes, turning her attention from external contemplation to internal investigation. "The consciousness that is observing is here, where it has always been. It's not in the sky or in the water. It's ... present, aware of both. And that consciousness that is aware of the stable moon and mutable fragments, does it change when the images change? Does it become disturbed when the reflections fragment? Does it feel better when the reflection is clear, or worse, when it's distorted? As Isabella carefully investigated her direct experience, an extraordinary understanding began to emerge. No, consciousness remains the same regardless of what is appearing in it. It's like the sky that is not affected by clouds or clarity, or like space that is not modified by the objects it contains. Yes, exclaimed Luminaria with genuine joy. You have discovered the secret you were looking for. You are like the real moon in the sky, unchanging, complete, always present. Your life experiences, thoughts, emotions, situations, relationships, are like reflections in the water, appearing and disappearing, sometimes clear, sometimes fragmented, but never affecting your essential nature. But sister, said Isabella, still processing this revelation, if I am like the stable moon, why do I feel so affected by life's changes? Because you were identified with the reflections instead of the moon, Luminaria replied patiently. You thought you were the temporary experiences that appear in consciousness instead of recognizing yourself as the spacious consciousness in which all experiences appear and disappear. It's as if the moon in the sky worried about what happens to its reflections in the water. But when the moon recognizes its own celestial nature, it understands that no matter what happens to the images in the water, it remains complete, unaltered, eternally present in its own sphere. At that moment, something fundamental shifted in Isabella's understanding. It was as if she had spent decades looking only at reflections in the water, thinking they were the total reality, and suddenly discovered that there was a real moon in the sky that had never been affected by any disturbance in the reflections. So when I lose someone I love, she said, testing her new understanding, it's as if a specific reflection disappears from the water. I may feel sadness for the lost reflection, but the real moon, my essential consciousness, remains complete. Exactly. And when I face difficulties or challenging changes, they are like waves on the surface of the water that temporarily fragment the reflections. I can respond appropriately to circumstances, but I no longer need to have my fundamental peace disturbed because I recognize my nature as the stable consciousness that observes all changes. Luminaria nodded with radiant approval. Now you understand why I call this practice living from the moon, not from the reflections. When you recognize your true identity as unchanging consciousness, you can participate fully in life, love deeply, respond to challenges, experience the full range of human emotions without losing your fundamental stability. You don't become indifferent to life's changes. You become free from unnecessary suffering that comes from believing that your essence can be damaged by temporary changes in circumstances. As the night progressed, the nuns continued to contemplate in silence, observing how the wind gradually subsided and the pond slowly returned to perfect calm. The moon's reflection gradually reunited from dancing fragments back into a clear and stable image. But now they all understood that the beauty and perfection of the reflection had never affected the real moon. This is the final teaching, said Luminaria, as the session drew to a close. The moon doesn't prefer when its reflection is clear and doesn't reject when it's fragmented. It shines equally on calm and agitated waters, offering its light without attachment to results. When you live from stable consciousness instead of identifying with mutable experiences, you develop this same quality of unconditional presence. You can love without desperate attachment, respond to challenges without being destroyed by them, and find peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances remaining favorable. In the following months, Isabella practiced what she came to call moon consciousness meditation. Whenever she felt disturbed by changes or challenges, she turned her attention from the particular experience that was happening to the consciousness that was aware of the experience. I am the consciousness that is aware of sadness, not sadness itself, she would remind herself during difficult moments. I am the consciousness that is aware of anxiety, not anxiety itself. I am like the moon that remains complete regardless of how its reflections appear in the water. Gradually, her relationship with impermanence completely transformed. Instead of seeing changes as threats to her happiness, she began to see them as natural waves on the surface of life that did not affect her fundamental stability. Instead of trying to control experiences to keep them always pleasant, she developed trust in the consciousness that could remain serene through any kind of experience. Years later, when Isabella became a respected teacher, she always kept a small pond in her gardens where she conducted the same contemplation of the reflected moon that had transformed her understanding. And whenever disciples came seeking stability in a world of constant change, she would take them to observe how the moon remains unaltered regardless of what happens to its reflections. The stable presence you seek, she taught, is not found in experiences that don't change, because all experiences change. It is found in the recognition of the consciousness that remains present through all changes, the moon of consciousness that shines equally on calm and agitated waters. You are not the temporary waves on the surface of experience. You are the deep conscious space in which all waves appear and dissolve. The sky of consciousness that is never disturbed by any cloud that may pass through it. Today, when you find yourself disturbed by changes in your life, whether loss of relationships, professional challenges, health problems, or any other transformation that seems to threaten your stability, remember Luminaria's moon, reflected in the lake. Recognize that you are the stable consciousness that observes all changes, not the temporary changes that appear in consciousness. Identify with the real moon of consciousness, not with the mutable reflections of the experiences that come and go. When you rest in this recognition, you discover a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a stability that cannot be disturbed by any temporary storm, and a presence that remains serene and complete regardless of what waves may be moving on the surface of your current experience. And so, in these 8 journeys that have taken us from Zen temples nestled in the snow-capped Andes to serene lakes reflecting the eternal moon, from shattered teacups revealing beauty in impermanence to butterflies teaching unity through silent presence, a fundamental truth about anxiety and presence emerged as a golden thread connecting all the transformative discoveries. Anxiety is not an enemy to defeat or a problem to solve. It is simply mental energy arising when we lose touch with the present moment and identify with thoughts about the past and future, instead of recognizing the spacious awareness that is always here and now. When Matteo deliberately broke the precious cup, he revealed that resistance to the present moment, including moments that seem broken or imperfect, is the only real source of suffering. When Javier discovered that presence cannot be lost or found because it is our fundamental nature, he understood that even thoughts of being lost arise within eternal presence. When Isabella learned to love completely, knowing it was temporary, she discovered that true love transcends physical duration. When Sophia recognized the spacious silence within which all sounds appear, she found the stillness that can never be disturbed by mental activity. When Elias stopped fighting distractions and recognized the awareness that was aware of distraction, he discovered that practice and enlightenment were never separate. when Ricardo experienced union with the butterfly. He understood that the separation between observer and observed is merely a mental concept. When Diego kicked the stone and experienced action without a doer, he realized that life lives through us with an intelligence that transcends mental control. And when Louisa distinguished between the real moon of awareness and the changing reflections of experience, she found a stability that doesn't depend on circumstances. Each story points to the same revolutionary discovery: you are not the anxious thoughts that appear and disappear in your mind. You are the spacious awareness in which anxious thoughts arise and dissolve like clouds in an infinite sky. You don't need to eliminate anxiety to find peace. You need to recognize the peace that is already present as the conscious space in which anxiety arises. Tonight, as you allow these understandings to settle deeply into your awareness like seeds of wisdom planted in fertile ground, remember that you are carrying not just ancient stories, but living keys to transform any anxiety into the recognition of eternal presence. When thoughts about the future create tension in your body, remember Mateo's broken cup and recognize the perfection of the present moment exactly as it is. When you feel lost in mental distractions, remember Javier's butterfly and recognize that you never left presence, you only changed the content of present awareness. When you fear that something precious is temporary, remember Isabella's ephemeral flower and allow yourself to love so completely that love becomes independent of duration. When mental noise seems disturbing, remember Sophia's bell and recognize the spacious silence in which all sounds appear. When you judge your meditation as inadequate, remember Elias and recognize that even judgments about practice arise in the awakened awareness that you already are. When you feel separated from the life around you, remember Ricardo's butterfly and recognize yourself as one of the ways in which life experiences itself. When anxiety about controlling outcomes arises, remember Diego's stone and trust in the natural intelligence of life to flow through you. And when changes seem to threaten your stability, remember Louisa's moon and recognize yourself as the unchanging awareness that observes all transformations. The presence you seek is not a future state to achieve through special techniques. It is the simple recognition of the awareness that is reading these words now, that is aware of any anxiety that may be arising now, that has never been absent for even a moment from present experience. May you sleep enveloped in the understanding that anxiety is merely energy in motion within the infinite space of awakened awareness. May you awaken tomorrow with renewed capacity to recognize presence amidst any mental turbulence. And may you carry in your heart the liberating truth that you are, and always have been, the serene peace you sought everywhere, except where it already resided. Rest now in the awareness that never sleeps, even when the body rests. Rest in the presence that never departs, even when the mind seems agitated. Rest in the peace that is your most intimate nature, more fundamental than any anxiety that may temporarily appear on its surface. If this journey of presence has brought the silencing of the anxious mind to your heart, write in the comments presence transforms anxiety, so that we can together create a current of conscious peace that circulates throughout the world. If these stories have brought serenity to your night and awakened recognition of eternal awareness in your heart, leave your like on this video. Each like is a vote of confidence that allows us to bring this ancestral Zen wisdom to even more people seeking to transform anxiety into awakened presence. Subscribe to the channel to receive weekly new journeys of Buddhist wisdom that transform restless nights into sacred periods of inner growth and restorative sleep, and enable notifications by tapping the bell to be notified whenever we publish new nighttime practices that convert mental worry into recognition of present awareness. Your soul deserves this constant refuge of peace. May you sleep in the peace of true presence and awaken in the light of awakened awareness. Until our next journey together,